Welcome to this Pedestrian Space hosted roundtable. The theme today is safety on public transit, and it is hosted by one of our network participants, Peter Kaljian, who is a planner for Sonoma County. Congratulations again on your new role. So this roundtable is dedicated to sharing experiences about safety on public transit in our network. We really have a mix of people with experience with public transit, from advocates to people working in public transit to just some of us who enjoy sharing our own lived experiences, positive, negative, and neutral on public transit. This roundtable will be recorded and shared on YouTube. And Peter, I'm going to put it in your capable hands now.
Great. Yeah. So like you were saying, we want to hear stories of people's time on transit when you felt safe or not safe. Or I think the other thing that's going to dovetail into this conversation is feeling respected by transit. So not quite sure where this conversation is going to go, but I kind of want to keep it in that sort of experience lane, because there's so much data that you can collect. But as far as the actual experience, that's what I really think would be fun to hear from a lot of people. So yeah, we can start with Muhammad, actually, right?
Yes, I'm here still, hopefully. Okay, so about the, you're gonna ask questions or I'm gonna share something?
Yeah, I mean, if you have an experience where you felt particularly safe or unsafe, you can just start with that, or I could ask you questions, whatever you're most comfortable with. But I thought people would just kind of tell stories of times that of observations and times that they felt safe or unsafe.
Definitely. Well, I'm personally more likely to use public transportation, especially bus, which is empty, because I feel more safe here, as I had two experience of not feeling safe in a crowded bus stop. In a crowded bus.
What city was that? What city you are in, Mohammed? Again, I forgot it. I think you mentioned it during the last meeting. But
I'm sorry, I have not stable connection. Can you repeat that again?
Yeah. Sorry. Which city you are in? I think you mentioned it in the other group. I think
I'm living in Iran, Isfahan.
Yeah.
Okay.
The city. What is the city?
Isfahan.
Oh, Isfahan.
Yes.
So how is like what kind of public transport modes you have, like buses or trams, trains?
I think we have only 3 modes of transportation. One is buses, definitely, taxis, and the newest one is the metro. It only has one lane, going from south to north.
Sorry,
Mohammed,
what did you? Oh, okay. Go ahead, sir.
Are you finished? Is it okay if I ask my question?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? See?
I didn't ask it. I wanted to ask you if there was a difference between how, I mean, you and most of the people here are men who are talking about this. And I'm sure that women have a very different perspective of using public transportation. I mean, at the moment, like we see what's going on in Iran. So I suspect that women have a very, very different perception, and probably in Sri Lanka as well, I would imagine. In Montreal, that's not so much of an issue, but I was wondering if you could talk to that at all, like how, do you actually see women who use public transportation? Like, can they use it by themselves? Are they hesitant to do that? Is that like, what is, how do women feel on public transportation in general in your city?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So in this condition right now in Iran, I mentioned that some people trying to shout others on the bus, especially women do that, and other women who covers her head and her hairs and so on, call it hijab, they call it hijab. And the other one is not covering it as their perspective and say that why you're not covering your hair, and they shout each other. It's kind of like a fight. Women usually use this bus transportation metro by themselves. No one's gonna support them. No one's gonna come with them and make gives them guarantee that nothing goes wrong with them. Women use it alone, and yes, women use it alone. That's it. And they're
But
great.
they feel safe. They feel safe to use it alone, and that's already a good thing. Like, I mean, there are some like in Saudi Arabia, I don't think women have the rights to travel by themselves. And even in like Dubai, I think they have separate cars for women in the metro system.
No, it's not like that. Although we have some segregation between women and men. Women, for example, in a bus should go at the end of the bus. They halfway the bus, and they should go at the back of the bus and use those seats. And also about the metro station, there are two wagons at the end and the head of the train. There's two wagons for women only. But people in Iran is not really strict to the rules as Islamic rules. They use each seats, each places where they like.
Do
Okay,
they
thank you.
like technically do they have rules in buses as well?
I think it's unwritten rules in that way. It's not a rule that women should go at the end of the bus and use those seats. I saw many many girls sitting exactly behind the driver, where usually men sit. It's normal for people, and there's no rule for that. But also, I say that the regime set some specific seats or wagons in metro condition for women only. But people use each places or each seats whether they want.
Although I just want to interject here, can folks begin using the hands up symbol for questions so we're not interrupting each other? Thank you.
Are there any more questions about that? I think that's really interesting. And I think that Mohammed, you mentioned that there was somebody who was hitting on you on the bus. And so you got off early and went on. And I think that is an experience that I think that I know transit agencies are aware of, because it's not, that's a big failing. If you have to get off the bus and walk, then they've failed their job. And I think, Zvi, you brought this up. I mean, the way that women experience public transit, you're right. So often the conversation is held by men, and I think that it is important to consider women and all other genders. Yeah, but did you have anything else to add, Mohammed? Because we'll move on then. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just wondering, Mohammed, how is like, are they crowded during rush hours? So like, what's that situation?
You mean the crowd times or using bus?
In peak hours, like, is it get like super crowded or like?
I understand your question this way. How crowded is the buses or public transportation? Am I right?
Yeah, both buses and metro.
Okay. So usually at morning when people go to the workplace, at noon or afternoon when they come back from their workplace to go to their home, or some people use the bus stations. I mean buses and metro at afternoon to go to some commercial areas. This time is the peak times, but mostly for noon and morning, where people used to go to school or their workplace. And also you can see many people use the cars and so on.
I see, thank you.
Oh, welcome. No question.
So then let's move on. Devantha, did you want to share?
So here in Sri Lanka, I live in basically in two cities, like in Kandy. Basically, most of I work in Colombo. That's the biggest city in Sri Lanka, and I spend my weekends in Kandy. It's a smaller city. So basically, all around Sri Lanka, we have two modes of public transportation. One is like the the most abundant, like the common one is buses, and they are not prioritized or anything. They just like run with other traffic, like in any other vehicle, and also trains. Basically, those are intercity trains, but they make stops in between cities. So most people use these intercity trains as also as a regional transportation method. And I would say the public transportation is more abundant and more accessible, but the quality and the efficiency and reliability is really low. So as before I was talking with Peter, if you consider a bus, if, let's say if the capacity is 50, they put like 100 people. So it gets super crowded. And also accessibility, like, so if you consider just going to the bus station, usually in most suburban areas, there is no sidewalks. So it's not really safe to walk from your home to bus station, because you have, here, like people drive like crazy. So sometimes it's just like in 50 kilometers per hour, they're rushing through like in like only like 5 centimeters distance. So can feel really dangerous, because sidewalks are not like abundant, like in not common in suburban areas. In cities they have like sidewalks. When it comes to since we discussed about like how women might feel safe, I mean, I don't know how women feel, but it looks like in Sri Lanka, at least like I mean, women and men like don't have much like segregation or anything. If you see a bus, like you see half men, half women, like they all mix together, like packed together, like it's crazy. I mean, I mean, women can be seen in like in all kind of public spaces and everywhere. But again, I'm not a woman, so they might have certain issues, especially in rush hours, like when like they're riding like really crowded buses and trains. They might have experienced certain negative things, I guess, but I don't know. That's in that case. Personally, I haven't experienced anything similar to what Muhammad has experienced, or like any safety issues. The only time I feel unsafe is like when I walk in a road which doesn't have a sidewalk. So walking is pretty unsafe because of the vehicle traffic. That's the biggest unsafe part. And also another thing, I think it's unique to here. Sometimes when you're trying to get into a bus, they just like, I don't know how to say, they start to move the bus before you even try to get into the bus because like they are in a rush. So here in Sri Lanka, it's mostly like private run. I mean, they have some government run bus networks, but most of them are private. So they have a pretty big so everybody's like trying to they don't want to like stop in a place more than like 5 minutes. So sometimes like when you try to get into a bus, they just like start the bus and start moving. And the same goes with like when you get out of the bus.
That's wild to hear. I had a quick question before I ask if anybody else does. You said that the train goes from city to city. So is that is there any rural service for that, or if you need to get out to say farmlands, do you take a bus, or how far out does that
Buses,
network
yeah,
go?
yeah. I mean, buses goes everywhere basically. Like there's no part of the country you cannot find a bus. But that being said, if you going long distance, for example, if you're going from like from one part of the country to the other end of the country, I would prefer to take the train, because if you take intercity train, it you can go really fast, but on the same railroad track, I mean, it's a, for example, like there's if you consider like Kandy and Colombo, there's only one railroad track. So in certain times you can find intercity trains. Certain times you can find what here they call like slow trains. They make more frequent stops. So like that. So, bus is the most common type, actually. Unless you use a private vehicle, bus is the most common.
Okay, great. Zvi, I see we just missed the bus.
Exactly. I had to turn the video on because the bus was coming and I was standing at a bus stop. Thank you, Janta, for really highlighting the importance of accessibility. That was really also the question that is really, I think when I think about safety, is also like, how do you actually get to the service and do you feel safe when you are waiting? I had a question. Here in Montreal, they recently have sort of expanded a program where at night people can ask to get off the bus, like at like mid station, basically. Like there's certain bus stops, but at night, I think it used to only be for women, but you could basically ask the driver to stop somewhere that was not a station. Do you have that option in Sri Lanka in your city? Is that like how? Yes.
Always.
Okay.
Always, I mean, you can just say like, not always, actually, I cannot say always, but they're pretty informal.
Okay.
The buses are pretty informal.
Thank you.
So, I mean, sometimes it's negative because like,
yeah, I mean, it has to obviously be safe for the driver as well.
They wouldn't stop.
But okay, thank you.
Mohammed, do you have a question?
It's not a question, but Z asked about mid stops in, not bus do not stop at bus station. Usually, it's a rule that buses should stop at bus stations. If they don't, they will be fined. The driver.
No, yeah, it's always they make the stop at the station. I was talking about like between the station, so it's up to them.
No,
they always make stops at stations in Sri Lanka.
It's also same in Iran. They have to start stations. Yeah. Even they cannot start. They cannot drive. They cannot do the favor for a passenger to get off the bus or get in the bus at crosswalk or mid stations.
Okay. Here again, it's like all like private like bus company competition. Like they just like, it's like just what that, I think in my opinion, that's like one of the reasons it's pretty wild, because they focus on more profit than service. So, I don't know. I see another hand.
Yeah, real quick though, are the trains private as well?
No, they are all state run, 100% state.
Okay, all right, and yeah, so we have
only buses.
Yeah. Zvidan, how do you pronounce it?
That was pretty good. It's Zvi. It's sort of like TZVI. So is it my turn to talk?
No,
or?
yeah.
Oh no, there's one more question. There we go.
So,
I don't
good
I don't have a
evening
question.
or good afternoon. Good evening or good afternoon, depending where you are. I'm Daniel, from Germany currently, but I refer many times to Budapest, Hungary. Whatever, because we are talking about Sri Lanka. Some years ago, there were already some low floor buses, as far as I remember, on Volvo B7 underframe. Were they low floor or still high floor?
Sorry, I didn't understand what the low floor buses.
Were there low floor buses in Sri Lanka? Or
I don't think I know what you mean by low floor buses. Can you understand?
He's asking
there were some Volvo B7 chassis buses, but a few in numbers. I mean, some years ago.
Peter, do you understand?
Yeah, he's asking about the model of bus that you guys use. Yeah,
I have no idea.
a very technical question.
I don't know,
because the majority what I have seen in Sri Lanka were very classic leather underframe high floor ones, and I saw some buses built on Volvo B7, I believe, on the frame, and those might have been low floor ones.
You mean the height of the floor? I see.
Sure. Were they low entry or low floor or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain buses have, we have here something called like ordinary buses. That's like the fare is low, and the other one is called intercity. That's what they call intercity, but usually because it's like more luxury type. So
okay.
So those kind of buses have the height is low because it's more comfortable.
Yep. Thanks.
Excellent. Do you have any more questions? Oh, Mohammed?
Yes, of course. I'm sorry, just a moment. Okay, so I can't pronounce your name. Sorry, Yvonne. So, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Which modes of transportation is most favored of people in your country, and which of them is the most favoring for you to choose? To go from a part of the city, and so on.
Yeah. So buses, like I mean, if you want to go from one place to another place, like the most I would say most reliable one is buses, because buses are always available, but they are not efficient because they run with other traffic. So most of the time they're stuck in traffic. But if you take a train, it goes more faster because, like, I mean, for obvious reasons. But trains are not always available in every part of the country. They only available in areas where there is a train track, major train track going from one city to another city. So in those, if you are going to a destination where there is a train track, you can go by train, but buses are all everywhere and always there. So my favorite, actually, because of the poor condition of public transportation, I always favor driving myself. But public transportation, when it comes to, because it's like really uncomfortable, like commuting in public transportation. But when it comes to public transportation, I would say train is more relatively more comfortable, but also that depends on the time of the day and the type of the train I take. And again, those like semi-luxury buses I mentioned earlier, those are also more comfortable. So, but again, those are intercity they don't available like within city. They are not regional or city buses. So yeah.
Our trains
that
for
answers.
regional scale. Our trains for regional scale. I think you mentioned something like that.
Sorry?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that trains for regional scale. I mean, from city to city, not.
Yeah. Usually trains like train tracks only available between cities. So
Okay.
like like we don't have metros, like for example. So metro light rail don't exist. So that's it.
And no specific routes for buses exist.
No, we have routes for buses, but they run with other traffic. They don't have prioritized like BRT or like bus lanes or like anything like that.
Okay.
Actually, they did a pilot study for BRT, and their conclusion was like in Colombo, they did a pilot study for BRT. Their conclusion, because they concluded it's not suitable because the reason they conclude that because the traveling time, the traveling speed and traveling time for other vehicles drop down. For example, because like if you dedicate 2 lanes for buses, obviously the individual vehicles travels a little bit slowly, right? So because of that, they concluded like it's not suitable. But I mean, if we did that pilot study correctly, I think they should measure like how many people move, like how fast, not how many vehicles, because obviously buses carry more people. So unfortunately, they only measure like how many vehicles pass.
Yeah, a common issue. I see.
During the rush hour. Yeah. Yeah, Peter.
This is great, and I love talking about transit and BRT, but I think I just wanted to refocus us to talk about safety again and the human experience.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. All good. It's all good. It's very interesting, but yeah, I think this one we're just going to focus on that. And if there's any more questions, let's go there. But otherwise, I think Annika wanted to take a screenshot of everybody too.
Yes, Zvi, could you turn your camera on? Are you there? There you go. Okay, 1, 2, 3, everybody. 1, 2, 3. We need to encourage more ladies to show up to the meetings too for the future. It's so great to see all you guys here, but I want to use these screenshots also to encourage people to join more of these roundtables. So I'll let everybody get back to it. And again, as Peter said, it would be really great, especially considering the limited amount of time we have, to keep it on the lived experience stuff. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. Were there any more questions about safety for Devontae? No. All right. Then does anybody want to go next? I realized I was just calling on people.
I can go next if that's okay.
Go for it.
Okay. So hi, I'm in Montreal. So I don't know, one of the jokes that we like to say here is that everyone uses BMWs, which means bus, metro, walk. Or it could also mean Bixi. We have a bike share system, which is actually also included as part of our public transportation. So we have an interesting mix of options that are fairly widely, and we do have regional trains and regional buses as well. Obviously, a lot has changed since COVID, and like the regional train service, which was really oriented towards downtown, is seeing a huge decrease in ridership, and bus service has remained a bit more stable. In terms of safety, yeah, I mean, I personally, I'm a man. I grew up in the States, actually, in a not so safe environment. So I'm used to sort of, I don't get disturbed very easily or feel threatened. But so that's not really much of an issue for me. But I certainly know women often might feel threatened on buses and metros. And an interesting comment that someone made to me once was, we recently replaced all of our metro cars with like basically it's like one long train now where you can walk from car to car. Like the idea was to sort of increase the capacity because the trains were having a lot of capacity issues, and they figured that people would be able to move around. And a woman said to me that actually she was more concerned about that because she wouldn't be able to switch cars to get away from someone. Like basically, you know, if she felt threatened by someone, they could actually follow her from one car to another very easily. And that was something that I hadn't thought about, and I think was a very interesting point. Another safety issue, which perhaps it's a little bit off to the topic of BRT that you don't want to discuss, but I think it actually is important. We do have reserved like bus priority measures, which tend to be sort of part-time at different times of day. And so they're not sort of physically, they're just like the lane functions at a certain time of day only for buses in theory, but there's nothing physically preventing other people from going into that lane. So this actually can often cause problems like conflicts. And I've actually been on a bus that had, well, we didn't actually collide with another vehicle, but a vehicle that was turning right, sort of right hooked the bus, if you will, like turned right in front of the bus. And the bus had to slam on the brakes really, really hard. And like literally it was a packed bus. There was like probably 70 people on the bus. In a physically separated bus lane, and there was like the driver didn't even know what they had done. Like they were turning right, they had the green light, so they figured, okay, no problem. Like there's a bus. The cars were all stuck in traffic. The bus was running smoothly. The driver didn't understand that this bus is like approaching, you know, like 30, 40 kilometers an hour, whereas the car was stopped and just sort of like turned. And so this thing where you don't physically manage the space is a big safety issue. And another issue with these reserve bus lanes as well is that technically cyclists are not allowed to use them, and that also causes a lot of problems. Like we don't have like and the bus drivers will actually sometimes physically threaten cyclists who do use them. Like I mean, everyone is trying to avoid traffic, so and like we do have reasonable bus service, like for a North American city. Like the buses used to come every 3 to 5 minutes during rush hour on certain lines, and now we have double-sized articulated buses, so they come like every 5 to 10 minutes. So, but then with congestion, like the service frequency gets all messed up. So we have issues where you have, you know, huge numbers of people waiting at stations, and when the bus comes, and so our stations as well as where you wait is not necessarily very well designed. Is often you're like sharing the sidewalk with people who are trying to walk. So like people waiting for the bus force people who are walking to actually walk in the street. So that's definitely not very safe. And another issue that we often have here is we have pretty serious winters where it can snow quite a bit and get quite cold. And the roads are very messy. And when the bus sort of pulls up into the station, there can be like, it's called slush. Basically, it's like frozen, dirty ice, water, very unpleasant, that the bus can sort of like shoot it all over the sidewalk and like really cover people in this water, basically. So like, not only do you need to be sort of like where you wait for the bus and how it's a safety issue, in fact, and it can be awkward. Like there's not necessarily, there are literally places where in the winter I do not walk there because I'm afraid that the bus is going to basically spray me with this stuff, and there's no way to get out of the way. Like there's no space to sort of negotiate, like to seek cover when the bus comes. So this is a sort of like more from a pedestrian point of view, but like how we interact with the bus service and stay safe as a pedestrian, I think is a crucial element in a lot of cities. Like I've used to travel a lot training transportation planners, and I've seen in all different environments, like in developing countries, they have a lot of microbuses that have, it's much more chaotic, like much more higher service frequency, and the stations are sort of a general area. They're not necessarily specific stations themselves. So it's much more fluid, but how people get on and off the buses, whether the bus stops, I think a few people mentioned that already. Like the drivers are often, you know, trying to be more efficient. and they don't even necessarily complete a complete stop, just like jump off sort of. Anyway, so I think that's enough for me for now. So I think that like for as far as this group is concerned, like I'm really concerned about the walking environment and how, particularly with bus stops, like metro stations as well have similar walking issues. And metro stations tend to be sort of points where people congregate in general. So one issue that might come up at certain metro stations is you have, perhaps homeless people and things like that who are sort of occupying the space in front of a metro station. And how do people feel comfortable going across that space to get into the metro station? Or even homeless people actually sleeping in the metro station. Like this is an issue that we've had here in Montreal, particularly in the winter. Like how do we deal with this? So how do we deal with, and I know in North America, at least, public transportation is sort of considered a form of welfare in a way, like people who don't have another choice. So the governments don't necessarily care. But in places where they're trying to offer a good service, like they're trying to attract what are called choice riders, like people who actually have a choice and get them out of their car to use public transportation. You need to offer them a service where they feel comfortable. And how does that work? And how does comfort and safety interact? Like if people are afraid to use the service, that's a problem. So, and in a lot of countries, physical safety is an issue, or could be an issue. I mean, tragically, actually, I think in North America, or at least in the US, it's probably more of an issue than people realize. Like I was just talking about this last night with a friend here. Americans don't understand that American cities are actually extremely violent. And most of the world actually doesn't have that same sense of physical violence, even places that are literally war zones. Like American cities are incredibly violent places and people are afraid. So like how that impacts people's travel choices. And whereas like in Montreal, for example, people feel comfortable walking anywhere at any time of day, and they don't feel a sense of danger to them, personal danger. Whereas I think in most American cities, people are actually afraid to sort of wander, certainly in certain parts of the city at certain times of day. And that translates into how they feel about using public transportation as well. So that's all for now.
That's great. And I think you kind of, when you talk about choice riders, kind of ties into the people using the bus lane to make turns. It's sort of a classist sort of, oh, I'm more important than that. And I mean, I don't know the situation, but that maybe it was just a mistake, but I think that we all experienced that. So great. Thank you. Let's see. I see Devante, you have your hand up first.
Yeah. So Zivi, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. So I think Montreal has a pretty expensive metro system, right?
It's reasonable. Like, and the metro is not. It's because of our winter, and we use actually rubber tired trains, so it's a closed system. So the metro cars can't go outside. So it's sort of limited in how the extent of the metro system. Excuse me. Our regional rail network is bigger, but has a much lower frequency.
So I was wondering if it's get overcrowded during peak hours.
Oh, for sure. Like the metro, at least before COVID, at least, like we were operating at crush capacity. Like literally, it was physically impossible to get onto the metro cars, and you would sometimes have to wait like 3 or 4 trains to come before you could find a space. And even buses, there were certain lines as well. Like you physically, it was like even if you pushed, you could not get onto the bus. Those days are, for the most part, past. I mean, we'll see how ridership is coming back, but I don't think that was really because we have a number of universities downtown as well. Like we have a fairly active downtown where people live, work, and we had 4 major universities. So, but like the people working downtown have not come back so much. Like these students are back there and there's still people living there, but the people who are working in the downtown core is much less common. And so I think there's issues with, who are the populations around the stations is causing some sort of concern, like to some areas, because like there's a lot of vulnerable populations that live in the central areas, and they tend to congregate around metro stations and things like that. So this is a bit of an issue the city is grappling with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
And Blair has her hand up too.
Yeah, thank you. That's a question. Something you said that I thought was worth highlighting. I live in, New York, in the New York area, and this is where I come from. And thinking about this, I think for those of us who have grown up in urban places where we're used to certain things, I rarely find myself that frightened or, feeling unsafe on public transit. And I recognize that I'm pretty unusual in that. And I do think that there is something here of people who are used to sort of the things that you see that you don't know, that and you get to things of the the appearance of danger versus actual danger, or conversely, or is that just Stockholm syndrome essentially from dealing with it a lot? You mentioned the homeless people, and you live in a big city long enough, you will see lots of, unfortunately, and you sort of get, I don't want to say a nerd to it, but you realize, okay, most of this is not actually unsafe, but to someone else who's not used to seeing it or isn't used to being approached. And I just think it's a very interesting divide that is worth plumbing.
Yes, I agree very much. And also in Southeast Asia, at least, I know that this very often is a classist issue. Like being able to afford a car means you've sort of achieved, a certain status. And one of the interesting things we find here in Montreal is a lot of people who immigrate here from Pakistan or India and places like that, they will not use public transportation, even if it would be effective for them. Like basically, it's like, we're not poor, so we're not using that. Or we're similar for riding a bicycle. Like they're not willing to consider those as legitimate options. Not because of safety, it's just it's really we've made it to North America, so we are by definition, we've, at least in Canada, like they choose who they want to allow to come here, so like you're a certain status, and from their point of view, that would be renouncing their status, if you will. So this is an interesting challenge that we have here with certain populations.
Devante, you have your hand up and you're smiling.
That's totally understand, because I think I think that's because like in those countries they don't have quality public transportation, because so people obviously, if you can afford a car, you like always use a car. So I think that I think the poor infrastructure leads to like the creating those kind of cultural things, I guess, right? I think that's
yeah.
One more question, really quick question. Did you say even in Montreal, like sometimes you have trouble getting out of the buses, like they don't stop, they don't make a stop?
Well, they have, like, inside of the bus, there's a bell that you push a button to ring a bell to tell the driver to stop, and usually they're quite good about stopping. If the bus is really crowded, like I've been in a situation where you physically could not get off the bus. Like even though the bus stopped and the door opened, there were just like so many people that you couldn't get to the door. But that doesn't happen very often. Oh. And like usually more or less where you want to get off, so you would sort of start pushing your way to get closer to the door before you actually got there. And in terms of people like stealing like backpacks and things like that on the buses, I mean, it certainly can happen, but I wouldn't say it's a common thing. And similarly for women being groped, like when you're really close contact, people's hands sort of go missing, or it definitely happens. And I've seen women like I have no idea what happened, but I've seen like a woman like confront someone very loudly, like get your hands off of me. And so it definitely happens, but I wouldn't say it's that common of a thing. And it's obviously much more likely to happen when the vehicles are very crowded. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Blair?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask how because you mentioned it, and I think it's interesting, the issue of snow in the winter. I know here in New York, especially at smaller bus stops, we end up, property owners, shovel snow off the sidewalk, and it forms these 3-foot-meter high walls around. And often you'll end up with just this little, 1.5 half meter pathway that someone has dug out through the wall to get on and off the bus. And that is, can be a very difficult or dangerous situation sometimes.
Here in general, Montreal actually has a very, very efficient and expensive snow removal operation. Like the city manages it, and the budget is literally hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And it's crazy the amount of machinery they use and effort that goes into it. And they actually prioritize sidewalks and bus stops and the bus network before they clear roads. Like sidewalks in a lot of parts of the city, the sidewalk is actually the first thing they clear, even before the roads. But still, even so, like as you said, it's the city responsibility. Like we don't expect citizens just to clear the sidewalk in front of their house. Like that's just doesn't exist here. But nonetheless, as you said, like it can happen, as you're going back and forth between the city pushing the snow one place and then off the sidewalk and then off the road, like it can go back and forth, and it can become a challenge getting on and off the bus in the winter. But I would say in general, we have challenging winters here, no doubt about it. And we do, we try to make the effort to minimize those problems as much as possible. And in general it works, but sometimes it can be hard.
Yeah,
and you can and also ice, like it gets really, really cold here, like -20 for like extended periods of time. So ice is actually like a major factor. And especially around metro stations where you have steam coming out, like the steam actually freezes. So like sometimes the areas around metro stations are like covered in a pure sheet of ice. So that can be really, really slippery. And there's the metro station near me, like I've a few times ran to try and catch the bus. I just like fell on my back just from the ice. So you need to be careful about that. But these are specific to Montreal sort of things, and they happen everywhere. They're not exactly specific to public transportation, but like this is sort of the everyday reality. And but despite our winters, like a lot of people do walk here, like year round. Like even though it is this cold, and we literally have ice covered sidewalks, like you sometimes can see videos of people skating, like around the cities around Montreal. But we have a very good urban scale here. So walking is really a good choice for most people, and we do try to prioritize the bus network. Like when a major weather event is coming, the city will actually tell people, don't use your car, take public transportation. So the city does prioritize that, and it works reasonably well. I don't know the ridership numbers, like how they shift with the different seasons, but our public transportation is reasonably effective in the winter. Although waiting for the bus when it's like -20 outside and the bus doesn't come, like this, I've been in that situation and it's really not pleasant. So yeah.
Yeah, I think weather is a big part of the experience for a lot of people. I think Danny has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So some remarks on snow and ice and such things. I believe in some Nordic countries and even in some German towns and cities, there is a mode of not removing the ice or snow from the sidewalls, but getting it, I would say, crushed by stones, because they just put small stones on that, and after melting, those can be collected and reused. And I found that a really effective way for making the sidewalk secure for the people. On the other hand, of course, it's not for high heels or something like that. So it's really for boots with safe on the surface.
Yes, and you're not. I wish we could do that here. And sometimes we do actually with certain cycle tracks and parks, we do compact the snow and make it sort of a more solid surface that you can actually walk on. Unfortunately, our winters are actually quite different from in Scandinavia. Like we have a lot more temperature variation, and it actually, like the coldest days are actually bright and sunny. So any hard surface like that, like when it's like -20, the sun is shining like full sunlight, and it can be even colder, like -30, even close to -40. And there's no clouds in the sky, and the sun is really bright, and snow basically turns to ice, like solid ice. And so if we don't remove the snow, we wind up with ice surfaces that can be like 10 centimeters thick of solid ice. And at that point, it's like concrete, like we physically cannot remove it. So we have a different context here in Scandinavia. Like it's more, the temperatures are a bit more stable, like around -10 to -15 range, and it's cloudy. So like they don't have the same complication with the sun making the snow become ice. And although even in Scandinavia, it's changing, like it's becoming harder and harder to maintain a sort of practical surface. But I mean, I wish that we were able to do that. Like we certainly have tried some of those techniques, but at the moment, at least, they don't work so well here.
Another specialty from Budapest that is that there are very massive lane grooves in bus stops because the asphalt melts during the summer, and the heavy axle load buses make these lane grooves really deep. I mean, if you have a good maintenance all around the world, these lane grooves are, I would say, 5 centimeter or maybe up to 10. So normally we have 15 centimeter to 30. So just like hell. So sometimes the buses are like trams, so absolutely good guided. And the water will stay in these traps, and of course come out when the bus arrives. And of course, most of the time or most of the cases, these things happen in bus stops. So the drivers arrive at the stops very, very carefully, not to cover people with water or slush ice or something. So that is a very important thing to keep the surface of the running path of the bus, regardless whether that is a separated lane or whatever, are free from water, and that's why it is in many stops made out of concrete instead of asphalt.
That's very interesting.
Everybody, I'm really sorry. I have to interject here. We really have to move on so that we can let everybody present have the opportunity. And remember, guys, the focus of this roundtable to lived experiences. We're getting really into technical stuff. It's interesting, but I really want everybody present to have the chance to present.
Thanks for the interruption, Annika.
Yeah.
Next.
Thanks, Annika. Blair, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So hi, I live in the New York City area, and so my experience, very used to riding public transit. Obviously, this is something you do here. This is how you get around and how you exist. And I generally feel very safe, and most people do. Something I don't, I don't think I've heard emphasized enough, but I think is generally true, is the importance of people, the importance of eyes and other things. The moments that are the most frightening and often the most dangerous are those when there are few people around. So the subway here is generally incredibly safe, and incredibly, and you also feel the safety, because there are people around. You know that if something happens, you have someone to reach out to, someone to someone to potentially intervene, or at least to do something. And as you get really late into the evening or overnight, um, you can have things. To some of the stuff that we were saying earlier about, um, you know, sometimes it can be, homeless people on the trains that can make people feel very uncomfortable. We had, for the first time in the subway's history during the height of the pandemic, we stopped overnight service here in New York because of fears of people sleeping on the trains and things like that, as it had become, a de facto thing. And uh, it caused a hell of a lot of issues because you can't get around the city without the trains running. Some of the bigger, some other issues you see right now, one of the uh, big ones that I don't think I see enough discussion about are people, and this has happened to me a number of times, are people smoking in trains and buses. Something that never used to happen before, in my knowledge, in my experience. But uh, you know, um, this happened when I was in Seattle last year, but it's a perfect example. It was a Sunday. It's a bus that comes, once every 45 minutes or once every hour. So it's, you want to get this. You can't just get off and wait for the next one. You get in and, someone's hotboxing the bus. They're smoking, marijuana on the bus. And I'm traveling with my partner who is asthmatic, and you're put into this really hard choice that do we stay on the bus and risk an asthma attack, or do we get off and be somewhere and not be able to get where we're going? It's a major problem. Here in New York, normally when you're on the subway, you can move to another train car, you can do something else. But that is a real issue. We have uh you know to as I say, I tend to find it generally feels very safe here because of the amount of people. Um, but there is some other, there are places that feel less safe. Elevators in particular can be major issues where they are visibly under maintained, which, in addition to being a lonely space, makes them feel even more dangerous than they might be otherwise, because they look like no one cares about them. Um, and it's funny because uh, something else, as we mentioned earlier, Zevi, not actually, is about violence in the cities. And obviously, New York is one of the safest cities in the United States, safer than many far smaller places. But we've, had issues with rising crime, and especially homicide and gun violence. And there is a certain level of randomness to it that makes it very hard for agencies to combat on a systemic level. There's one thing to things to make it feel safe on a day-to-day level, people, things like that. But I do know people who, they will see the news and they will see, someone randomly shot going over the Manhattan Bridge, or the unfortunate, kind of terroristic attack that happened on the subway last year, where, a man shoots, 14 people. And they're harder because, as a lived experience, you hopefully and thankfully will never experience it, as the percentage of time that goes by on hours, of people riding. It's very, very unlikely. But these are major news stories that get people very scared, and they're very difficult. Um, so, and I think you know, people who, to go to my earlier point that I said, you know, people in New York tend to be very, you know, you get used to some of the facts of big city life. You get used to the fact that there are homeless people and that there are, you know, things, but it was especially became obvious during the pandemic when, and especially coming out, where people are starting to travel more and there are less other people distracting, that, you know, uh the, for lack of a better term, the emotionally disturbed become a bigger issue. You end up with, you know, people who are trying to pick a fight or are trying, you know, they're not in their right mind, for, because, you know, for lack of a better term, and it becomes, it's very difficult. And for people who are not used to dealing with that, it is incredibly off-putting. I think most, you know, native New Yorkers will be like, yeah, okay, you move to the next train car, whatever. But, you know, if you're trying to attract new riders or bring people back, these are major issues that need to be dealt with. So um, I think that's kind of the biggest. Oh, one last thing, and probably the least safe place that I have experienced personally are lonely bus stops in places you're not used to. You go to a neighborhood you don't know well, and you're at you know, a bus stop, and there's nothing there, and there's not a lot of people around, and people, that is a very vulnerable moment. I don't mean to pick on Seattle. It's just that was my last memory of this, where we were there in this very car-centric environment. Just that particular street is a very, you know, 6-lane road, so you're not, and, you know, next to a bus, you know, waiting for an infrequent bus where all the windows are broken on the bus shelter. You know, there are uh you know, lots of people hanging around that you don't, you know, necessarily feel super safe around, which you would feel fine, you know, if it was during the day or if there were more people, but there aren't, and you start to get really, you know, those are the moments. And again, it comes down to how many people are around, how alone are you, you know. So that's my uh that's most of what I have to say. So um
That's
Levanta,
true.
you want to? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, with regards to the smoking thing, isn't there anyone on the train you can complain to in such a situation?
Yeah, there is, but you know, it's funny. We've had so much, and this is what happened. You know, the uh, train crews tend to, they will yell at somebody, but they don't want to be directly the one enforcing stuff, because it's very difficult. And uh,
No, I
for
was
a
talking
lot
about
of,
something like official.
yeah, no, but also like, and you know, they will sometimes call police and things, but for a lot of very complicated reasons, the, you know, police have been less willing to deal with issues like this, and people have been less willing to call police to deal with issues on this, and it has kind of spiraled.
Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that's something that a lot of places don't always have, right? Sometimes when I'm taking the train in Europe, there'll be somebody driving and there'll be somebody enforcing the rules, but it's just not easy to get staff to do that. And I don't know if it's the same in New York as it is over here on the West Coast, but yeah.
Yeah, it's generally true. In fact, our trains are more staffed than most. We, you know, we have 2 people at least on every train, but they're very busy. You know, one is driving and one is operating the doors, and they're very busy doing their job, and they can only do so much. There's no one, you know, really walking the trains. And we will have the closest we have is police officers who are assigned to the station, but they're mostly hanging out in stations and not doing much, to be perfectly blunt. And I'm not, you know, I don't want to paint too broad a brush, but they're there as much just for presence as anything else. And so it doesn't really help with these sorts of situations.
That's too bad because that's what they're there for.
I agree, and it's if they're going to, if they're going to be there, that's exactly, and it gets very, as the Americans in big liberal cities know right now, policing is a delicate subject still, and so I think we're also seeing the long tail of that, without actually trying to make a qualitative statement. Just people are, some people are less likely to call on police for good and bad reasons, and some people in the police are less likely to do things for good and bad reasons, which is, good in some situations and very bad for other sort of things like this. So
It's a completely different situation for them, right? Because it's a confined space, and if there's only one or two security guards, enforcement officers, whatever, and there's 10 guys come up, like, how hard are you going to enforce the rules when you got to think about your own safety? So it's
yeah, exactly. No, it's very true.
And actually, you said you could just move to a different car, and that kind of reminded me of what Z was talking about, where it's a lot easier to ruin the experience for everyone when all the cars are connected. All that danger is shared with everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a worry because we're looking at getting gangway trains in New York right now, and that is the concern I've heard a lot. And it's sort of an open question whether another car that is still connected will be different enough of a space for people to feel safe. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm old enough to remember when you were allowed to walk between cars through the doors, which they a few years ago started strongly enforcing a rule to not. But that all, that alone had a small effect, that even between stations now you feel stuck in one car if something is happening that you don't, for safety. And another thing that they don't want people walking between the cars. Well, all of a sudden, if you feel the need that you want to, for some reason, you have to wait for the next station, which if you're on an express train or in certain places can be actually quite a distance. So.
Yeah, and you don't know the situation of the car that you're getting into, right? It's you. It shows up, and you get in the first door that you see, and who knows what you've been walking into. And then you're
Well, I
stuck
was gonna
there.
say,
For another stop.
New Yorkers develop a sense of this. You see, like, oh wait, is that car not as many people in the others? That's actually a sign to move away from that car, not to go towards it. And if you're having a day where you're sort of out of it and you just sort of walk into it, that's exactly it. You're just like, oh yeah, Zevi, Z, I'm not sure.
Sorry, I was walking.
Oh,
Just to talk about the issue of the safety authorities in the transit. This has been, I mean, particularly since COVID, this has become a really challenging issues where bus drivers and even the sort of metro safety, they're like, we can't enforce this stuff. Like, it's too dangerous. It's too much of a risk for us. So how do we deal with it? And I think this is sort of like a symptomatic problem of a larger problem where we've sort of lost this sort of sense of communities self-enforcing and feeling comfortable to say to someone, look, you stop doing whatever you're doing, whether it's illegal or not. Like, people, there's a sort of general level of, I don't know, we expect somebody else to intervene on the one hand, and like the sort of social norms have been, I don't know, degraded, I guess you could say. And this is actually, I think, one of the, and I personally think this might have a lot to do with personal mobility, actually. And like, we've lost a sort of tolerance of being in public spaces with other people. And fear is a big factor of that, as well as how we feel being around others. Like, I've actually heard people say to me, I don't use public transportation because I don't like being with other people, like literally. And that is a major challenge. Like, how do we deal with that?
Yeah,
And,
I agree completely. I agree completely. We've had and that was it, in the past, ultimately, if someone was really belligerent, not following the rules, you'd go to a law enforcement. But yes, you had a culture that would try to enforce this. You would have someone would say, hey, what the hell are you doing? You can't do that here, and people are less willing to do that right now. There's been kind of a fall apart of civic culture. And to your thing of people being afraid of others. I mean, that is one of my, big fears coming, out of COVID and things is, the strong push for good reasons and another thing to stay home, to stay away from other people. Well, especially in America where we here, we are so used to, our culture is all about fear other people, fear other, be in your own home and fear other people. That can metastasize, and that worries me,
Very much so.
Devonta?
Before we take Devonta's question, I just want to
Yeah.
put out that we're wrapping up, and so just being mindful of time. Go on.
Yeah, let's make this the last.
Really quick. So in New York, I was wondering, like, is it common for everyone to use public transportation, or like, is there any like difference between like people on the street and people on subways? Like because in Philadelphia, I have been to, like, I saw on like on the street, you can see all kind of people, but if you go to subway, you see people with economically disadvantaged, I would say.
No, yeah, New York is unusual in American cities in this regard, that both the well-off and the people who are very much not well-off ride the transit. There are people who drive, there are people who try to do this, but it's very expensive and it's very difficult. It's very, so we're sort of in a very unusual spot for the United States where in fact, if you actually look at ridership numbers, the ridership of public transit, the average income of public transit riders in New York is actually a little higher than the average income of the city as a whole, because it's skewed by people living in Manhattan who, if you've ever been to Manhattan, you don't want to drive here. You don't want to be, whereas, you might have other people who are doing more blue collar jobs out in the outer boroughs who don't really have, are not going in a direction that transit's designed for. So they are more likely to drive. So it's weird, but in, most other, and there's a few other American cities like that, like Boston and San Francisco proper. But if you go to most other American cities, it's exactly that, where the bus network, the people who use the buses are completely different social class than the people driving, and the people, on the street are very different from the people in the cars, and the two very rarely ever interact.
Thanks, Blair.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation about who takes the train, and I think you hit it on the head. People who a lot of times there'll be people who don't have other options, which is something that you said, Devontae, was, but that's something I'd love to explore a little bit more in a future roundtable. But I think that unless anybody has anything super pressing, they got to get out there. I think we're going to try and do one of these again, because I really love hearing these lived experiences and and I know we didn't get to everybody, but I really appreciate all of this, sort of soft data stuff, and I love this. This is fantastic. So I think we'll try and so I think that we're gonna try and do this again next month, just because this has been fantastic. Was that?
We didn't have Danny, right? Didn't have.
Danny, well, I don't want to take away from your time, because everybody did get plenty of time. If you want to go really quick, I would love to hear some stuff from you, but we are just right at our time, and I didn't want to short you on that. So I'd love to start with you next time we do a roundtable. Is that all right?
I think it's Daniel in Budapest, or Wolfensbüttel. Is that all right? We make sure.
Yes.
Is it okay if we make sure you show up at the next roundtable and we start with you the next time? Okay, fantastic.
Of course, it's not urgent. It's important.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, Annika, did you have anything that you wanted to let everybody know before we wrapped up? Like that?
I'm just a background figure here in this roundtable.
Okay.
I've just really enjoyed hearing everybody. It would be great. You know, it's really interesting, you guys and a lady. I'm sorry, I grew up saying you guys for everybody. But we had 6 women and 6 ladies and 6 gentlemen RSVP for this. So I find that really interesting. Of course, things are very fluid and people, you know, have weekend plans and everything and things come up. So I think it's just really interesting to see these evolve, and also to see the kind of, to me, I'm observing a kind of tension in like getting people to share their lived experience versus a lot of the professional expertise a lot of you have with being in public transit, but kind of getting back, as Peter said, to the soft data. So I'm going to be excited to see, you know, these roundtables continue hosting them and welcoming more network participants and sharing, getting into this really juicy lived experience stuff.
Annika, that's why we
Yeah.
need more women. The social dynamics are very different.
I know, and that's why I took the screenshot. I'll be drumming it up. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something that Z said is about being a pedestrian advocate. I think everybody here is at a certain comfort level with going out and being in the public and doing that. And so that's why I think it's really important to hear from people at different experience levels, because everybody here seems very confident taking public transit and doing these sorts of things. But what I want to hear is what's keeping people from them. So it's so hard to get that data, which is why I love talking about this. But we can do that at another time.
Right. I do want to share really quick as well, Peter. We have people in the network who do live in regions and in cities where generally women don't ride transit at night, you know, after the sun goes down, things like that. So I think that's a real benefit. We're all here. We're all part of this global walkability correspondence network. And I think that's where this can get really interesting, is to, I had no idea myself when I began learning about that and the experiences of women in different areas, but also learning from a lot of you folks who are really deep in identifying tram models and train models. And that's the whole purpose of this network, is collaborative learning too. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to Peter hosting more of these, I hope. Yeah. Okay, great. If you're interested in hosting too, or co-hosting and on specific topics, I think a lot of things came up in this roundtable. Snow, of course, women's experiences highlighting. There's a lot of stuff we can do, and I'm really open to welcoming people to also co-host roundtables. So just let me know. And Peter, I've really enjoyed you hosting. So let's keep it going next month.
Yeah, I agree. We only scratched the surface on a lot of this stuff. Yeah, so I would love to keep, if everybody's, anyway, whoever can come, it'd be great. But
Thank you, Peter. It was very enjoyable. Really nice.
Excellent. Yeah, was there any closing thoughts? Otherwise, I think we'll let people get on with their day. All right, thank you, everybody. And we'll be in contact for the next one.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.